All right, we're live, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is Gray. Gray,
So
I think there's nobody watching yet. People usually filter in as this goes on.
yeah,
Um, where should I start with Gray Gordon? Actually, why don't you introduce yourself, Gray?
dude, I hate doing introductions for myself because I never know how to like filter the pertinent information because I do a lot of stuff. So
Okay.
I sometimes try to prioritize recent things that I'm doing. I guess I'll just paint with a broad brush and say I'm a dude from Fort Wayne, Indiana, in my early 30s who has been involved in subculture in some capacity for 20 years now. I got involved real young. My dad was like a hardcore punk alt guy in the 80s and early 90s. And I didn't really get in through my dad, but I started discovering that stuff. He never foisted it upon me. And then I kind of was like, oh, my dad was into this stuff too. So I got in pretty young. He facilitated me being able to go to shows, things like that. And now I do, like many people that are 33 and still involved in like hardcore and subculture, I do a podcast called Demo Listen. I run a little tape label associated with that. I play in a bunch of bands. I maintain a DIY space, and I do some music writing stuff behind the scenes, not like music journalism, which is a thing I usually detest, but like behind the scenes stuff, PR, press releases, little blurbs for labels, liner notes for reissues of, classic punk and hardcore records, that kind of stuff.
Cool. Okay. So, like, throughout the day, and as we were talking about before we went on, I'm everybody out there. I'm extremely sleep deprived today. Um, not going to get into it too much, but my dad has been sick. He's been staying with us this whole week. This morning, I had to, after working an 8-hour shift, I got out of work at 7 a.m., got my dad packed up and headed back to South Carolina. My aunt picked him up. My son was also going back to school after vacation. So I got him going. I slept about 4 hours. So I apologize to everybody if I'm a little bit rambly. The first thing I was familiar with via Gray was the Demo Listen podcast, which I think came across my radar because I discovered the Axe to Grind podcast,
Sure.
and there was the now defunct Axe to Grind Facebook group. Um,
Hmm.
so I started checking that out, and then I discovered that you play in bands. You had like a singer songwriter solo thing that you did for a while
Hmm.
there.
Yeah.
Um, and you're active in all this stuff. How did the Demo Listen thing start? Was it? I know you've been long friends with Nate, your co-host. Did you guys just talk about like, hey, we just want to do this thing where we? Is it a way to keep you involved in like checking out new stuff? Like, was that part of the impetus for it?
Yeah, partially. I think that was like a happy accident of the whole thing. I mean, he and I already stayed involved. Like, I have been booking shows since I was 17. Like I
Mhm.
said, we were still we've been playing in a band together for 13 years. Our band Parasitic Twins has been together for
Yep.
like 13 years. Some periods of time more active than others, but like fairly consistently for over a decade now. So we're always out there. We're always buying new records. So I think staying hyper connected to stuff has been a really happy sort of incidental side effect of what we do with Demo Listen, because now we're really in the know, whereas before we
Right.
were just mostly in the know. But I think the genesis of it was like, we had discussed and kicked around this idea of doing, at first it was like maybe a local NPR affiliate show, but then we were like, man, we couldn't really do what we want within the confines of like terrestrial radio because there's just too many limitations on it.
Right.
And then we kicked around the idea of doing public access, which we still have some aspirations of doing. We initially talked about doing a show where bands would come in and play live, and then we would do like our Statler and Waldorf style critique of the bands, like in person with them in the room. And then eventually that morphed into something that was a little bit more manageable because, to do a public access show, you got to have people to run the cameras. We have a really good and accessible public access studio through our the main branch of our like downtown library here. But nonetheless, there's like a learning curve to all that stuff. Podcasting seemed easy enough. And he and I had already been doing a podcast on a much lower level about television. Ostensibly, it was like it started about to it was kind of about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and then it
Huh.
kind of evolved. And it was just a casual thing. I didn't promote it a ton. The production qualities were pretty low, but it was us kind of like feeling it out and getting a feel for the format, I guess. And so then when the public access live band idea, when it became clear that we just wouldn't have like the time or resources to really put towards that to make it be what we wanted it to be, we were like, well, and I think this was Nate's idea. It was how it finally kind of coalesced into a podcast. He walks around in the woods all day by himself as a job, basically. There's more to it than that, but that's the crux of what he does, is like he's a man about nature. And he was
Preservationist,
like, yeah, he works for like a big nonprofit. And he was just like, dude, what if we just did a podcast where we just listened to like demos, EPs, new releases, whatever, and then we just sort of spitballed, and then within like a week, maybe 2 weeks, we were just like, we put up the first episode.
Cool. Yeah, it's been very enjoyable. I think a lot of people, I think for a little bit, people were like, wow, they really went in on that one poor misguided band that didn't know what they were in for by sending that in, or their friends didn't know that what they were in for. But honestly, and again, like we were talking about off air, like I hadn't listened for a little bit, and the past couple of months I've been listening every week. Like, it's very honest, but it's also very even handed. And if it's not your thing, you guys are pretty much like, I get what you guys are trying to do. It's good for what it is, but no thanks.
Sure.
I think it's pretty good. It's pretty fair. And and Nate's has a good approach to ranting that I really enjoy myself.
Yeah.
The sort of tangential off topic things about life in general, or the world at large, are actually just as much as why I tune in as the music criticism or the music observations. So
yeah, I feel like Nate is kind of the linchpin of the show. Like, I couldn't do it without that guy. Conversely, not to short sell myself, I think if I weren't there to rein in his darker tendencies, that also might be a tough listen. So I think our rapport and the way that we temper each other's worst traits allows us to land at like a surprisingly listenable middle ground,
yeah, no, it works definitely well. It's good. It's a good balance. And not to get too off topic, and I don't even know. I might kind of stray away from this, but the one thing I wanted to do with these Monday live streams was ask the viewer like anything from like 1 to 5. Like, are there any records that you've been spinning a lot this week, Gray? Before we go on and talk about other types of shit.
Dude, I cannot stop listening to that new TV Repairman record.
Okay, I know nothing about it.
Oh my goodness, dude. It's so good. So it's one of the dudes who's involved in that Australian scene that birthed like GT.
Okay.
It's one of the guys that plays in GT and like Satanic Togas and like Research Reactor Corp, like that whole scene. I think maybe some of the guys in 1-800-Mikey play in that too. So that's that Australian scene of like kind of weirdo left of center rockin' lo-fi punk stuff, egg punk if you want to use that terminology. Seems to be pretty incestuous. Like all of those folks kind of play in each other's bands, and even if they're not on the recordings, because a lot of those are solo recording projects, they seem to like fill out each other's live acts pretty frequently. And the new TV Repairman, I think that's a guy named, I don't know if that's Kel. I'm not sure which guy it is who's involved in like GT and whatnot, but he put out this record, What's on TV, and I want to say it came out in like January, like right at the beginning of the year, maybe February, and it's just hyper catchy lo-fi power pop stuff. I mean, I cannot put it down, dude.
I find that to be a pretty big consistent thread with the stuff that you and Nate like. There's like kind of the raw like 80s style hardcore stuff, some other kind of sounds, maybe some crustier kind of D-beat stuff you guys dig on.
Yeah.
And then there's that kind of garagey power pop stuff, which I like. I'm just picky about, and admittedly, I'm so out of touch with anything of that style. But it sounds, the way you guys gush about it, I should probably check some of it out, because it's a sound that I appreciate. I just like, I only know like the bare minimum myself of like the 90s stuff, like the Gories or whatever from like Detroit, you know,
Sure.
like the real. I think the most recent band I listened to that might be somewhat the same universe is maybe like the Bougie Boys from Canada or something like that.
Yeah, sure. Bougie Boys is in that same world broadly for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, that's about as close as I can get. But yeah, I mean, these guys speak about it so highly. I feel like, I don't know, whenever I get tired of listening to just death metal, which bound to be sooner or later. Like, you know, well, I'll definitely give that a spin. But
Yeah, you should. It's quite good. So that's probably been at the top of my listening recently. I've also been on kind of a hard rock kick the last couple weeks because Kiss came up on the show, and we spoke less than flatteringly about Kiss. Mark from TKO Records sent me this 1973 Kiss demo that I checked out, and that was genuinely quite good. But then the only thing that it made me do really, it didn't really increase my affinity for Kiss. It just made me want to go listen to like all of the 70s hard rock that I love. So
right.
I've been on a big like UK like early to mid 70s UK hard rock kick. So I listened to like Budgie, UFO, Slade, the first couple Thin Lizzy records, that kind of stuff. I've been really big on just a general like 70s hard rock kick, and it kind of ties into the next release that we're doing through Demolition, through the tape label that we do, is this 5-song EP by this new band Highball that has this dude Shane in it, who also plays in this very, very sick death metal band called Anthropophagus.
Yep, I know Anthropophagus.
He plays in like a million sick bands, but his newest band Highball, he's like playing guitar and singing for, and it's a very 70s kind of Thin Lizzy, right on that border between hard rock, proto heavy metal, and power pop, where that like mid to late 70s era Thin Lizzy sits very comfortably, with like super catchy harmonized leads and shit. And then a lot of that British kind of pub rock or like boot boy glam kind of stuff. It's just pitch perfect, like 70s hard rock that kind of captures everything that I love. So actually, it's up on Bandcamp. The physical releases aren't out yet. It's at press right now, but I've also been spinning this new Highball record, 5 Cubes, a ton. And if anything that I just described is in your wheelhouse, go listen to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thin Lizzy, especially. I went back in on a big deep dive with them not that long ago, just because it's one of those bands I can, you know, I have a normie job. I work in an imaging department in a in a hospital, so I'm not going to be spinning like Napalm Death or anything.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, what can I play that isn't going to be offensive to the people around me, and also won't be distracting to me when when I'm trying to work? And so I would just put on like a huge like 3-hour mix of Thin Lizzy. And I have a long history with that band, and yeah, all that boot boy glam stuff is awesome.
Yeah,
all the older juke and stuff like that. It is funny about Kiss because there's so many people have a strong emotional connection to that band. And I heard them a bunch when I was a little kid, before I discovered heavier stuff, but they never grabbed me the way that, say, like AC/DC did. I'm not really entirely sure why that is. It is interesting to think, though, that like they really were legitimately like the ass end of the New York glam scene. Like, I mean, they were, they were part of that whole. They were the most successful band out of the same scene that the New York Dolls came from, but it's not really discussed that much because they went in so much of a bigger like commercial direction. But yeah, they definitely got some jams. They got some tracks. I'm not mad at them.
Sure. Yeah, they do have some tracks, but it's just one of those things where they inspire such fanaticism and devotion. And my immediate kind of one-to-one comparison is always the Dolls, because like they do come from that scene, and it's so night and day. And even if you're talking about the stuff that immediately followed the Dolls, when Kiss was really like had a stranglehold on North American hard rock and stuff, like you had all like the New York proto-punk stuff that was happening too. That's not a million miles away from that early Kiss material.
Yeah,
and is
Dictators.
a zillion, yeah, dude. And it's a zillion times better. Like even if we're going like more roots than Dictators, if we're talking about like you know, like LAMF and shit, you know,
Oh yeah, sure.
like Johnny Thunders or any of that kind of stuff. Like,
Heartbreakers, yeah.
yeah, like it's a zillion times more compelling, better written, harder riffs. You know, it's just like there are some hits in there. I can name a few Kiss songs that I like for sure, but in the context of what was going on with proto punk, hard rock, that glam scene, like it's just it's just like who gives a fuck? I guess it's just my feeling about it. You know, who
Yeah,
gives a
no,
fuck?
I'm same page, man. I don't know. It is what
Yeah,
it is. Um, so when I think of like your work and what you're putting out there into the world, you've talked a lot on the podcast as of late about how things are. You said in your words, the Midwest hardcore scene is having a moment right now. Things
yeah.
are really ramping up, and I think that's awesome, especially in the wake of the pandemic and everything. How is it now compared to like when you were a kid going to shows in the Fort Wayne area when you were growing up?
I mean,
Is it like
it's interesting just because it's like it's such a different energy than when I was a kid, because I started going to shows around 2003. So we were coming off of the 90s, which certainly there was a boom in sort of in subculture music broadly in the 90s. And now we were moving into this space where a lot of kind of dyed in the wool, real deal, DIY, hardcore, metalcore, that kind of stuff was crossing over into mainstream spaces with sort of
Mhm.
bizarro permutations of it. So now you had like the Trust Kill records and the Ferret records of the world and the Victory records of the world
Mhm.
making this mallcore pivot where like all of the marketable aspects of metalcore were now being thrown right to the front of the mix and watered down. So, you know, and then you still had the hangover with like the kind of mainstream fascination with punk heralded in by Green Day and like all the Green Days and the Sum 41s of the world, you know? So we were in this really strange moment where subculture, quote, broadly, was like it had a degree of mainstream exposure that definitely caused another similar sort of like moment in the early to mid aughts. And so through one avenue, there was like the sort of VFW hall church basement metalcore stuff that was like a direct hangover from the 90s. And that those were largely a lot of the early shows that I went to, even though I didn't connect with the music. I remember going to like I had gone to some sort of like scuzzy, shitty kind of like street punk and like ska shows and kind of bounced around from show to show the first couple years. And then when I was probably 15, I went to it was like in the, just like the, I don't know, like event center of this local community college. And I didn't love the music, but I did see dudes, you know, playing breakdowns on
Mhm.
stage with X'd up boxing gloves. And it was enough to make me be like, oh, what the fuck is this? And additionally, there was like 300 fucking kids there. So it's just
Yeah.
like, well, everybody, I like, it seems like there are people here that I want to know. People are fucking going crazy. People are stage diving. This music isn't like, it doesn't sound like the punk that I enjoy. This doesn't sound like Black Flag or Circle Jerks or whatever, you know, but it seems to be in the same lineage, and I'd like to check this out further. And then additionally in Fort Wayne, there was this kind of, there was a DIY space scene that was emerging that was mostly spearheaded by Nate, actually.
Okay.
He did a house venue called the Harrison House for many years, from like 2004 to we finally shuttered it in like 2018, I want to say. So he ran it consistently for a long time. And then around like 16, like maybe, so this is mid 2000s, I discovered that scene, which was also kind of thriving in its own way. And that kind of spun off into an additional scene that my friends, when my friends and I started bands, there was kind of a new, more kind of capital H hardcore scene that spun off, that was kind of a collision of those two worlds of
Right.
like the holdovers from the VFW hall shit, or the kids that were getting in at the tail end of that. And then like kids in that DIY world. So again, you know, show attendance was fucking great. It was really good. There was no dearth of local bands to choose from. This new wave, I think, as far as the numbers go, it's not at the height of that kind of church basement stuff, because that was so that was so close. It was brushing elbows with the mainstream in such a way that the attendance was just like bound to be higher.
Oh, sure.
But it's certainly comparable to the attendance in like the DIY shows that we were doing in like the kind of late aughts into early 2010s when I was playing in bands around then, you know, like, I mean, Fort Wayne's not a big place. It's like the metro area is under 500,000. It's not a tiny place either. It's, the metro is like 400,000. But you know, like I can do, I don't know, I that like that. I can do a show in a basement, and conceivably, if it's a hype show, like I'll squeeze 130 paid plus bands into a basement space. So like that's pretty fucking good, especially for just like a city in the middle of some cornfields. You know what I mean?
And you've got some pretty big names coming around. I mean, Enforced is playing soon, right? At the
Yeah.
Bughouse.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there was another big was it Gel? There's another bigger show coming
Yeah.
around.
Yeah. Gel's come through a few times because I think I championed them very early on via the podcast, and we got in touch with one another. So I booked them on like one of their first tours, and then I've just booked them every year since then. So in August, hypothetically in August, Gel's coming through. We haven't set anything in stone yet, but like at the beginning of the year, I had Spine come through, Midwest fucking legends. Big Laugh, who are homies of mine, who I've known from other bands, my old band, well, like Parasitic Twins actually like toured with a couple of those guys' old band many years ago, like a decade ago. But yeah, super sick hardcore band on Revelation Records. And then we had like at the end of last year, we had that band Restraining Order come through.
Oh yeah,
they're coming back in September with Gum. We have Combust from New York. Really sick, like Killing Time style New York hardcore stuff. They're coming through in August with this another new, very hype kind of New York hardcore style band called Wreckage. We have a bunch of sick shows coming up, man. We low key, we may have Gehenna coming through in October, but that is contingent upon whether or not the kid I know who's booking it can manage to wrangle the various personalities in Gehenna to get like a cohesive, successful tour routing set up. But it's in the works. So
it's, you know, Mike Cheese maybe has mellowed a little bit. Hopefully
he's mellowed some from what I can tell. He's mellowed some from what I can tell. I saw him at the infamous A389 anniversary bash, the Where's My Fucking Dope show, if anybody's familiar.
Yeah, I saw them at a Chaos and Chaos, and he was pretty untethered.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, that whole like early 2000s metalcore scene, because I had nothing to do with like that side of hardcore, like so because I lived in Syracuse and I got really into crust and street punk after going to like Syracuse hardcore shows for years, and moved to Boston because I wanted to be with the other punks or whatever, you know. And I played in like a crust band, and I see Toxic Narcotic like every other week. And it was like, I was kind of wrapped up in that. And then I went to Europe for a little bit to travel around, and I saw like squat festivals in Germany and saw like Tragedy and stuff. Then I moved to Maine and started a distro that was, you know, tabling at shows. And I just went to any show that I could in Maine. And we're talking, even though Maine's kind of remote, it's still like New England in the early 2000s. So all that like more commercial leaning metalcore stuff was exploding. And I was just like, the last stuff that I'd heard that was kind of from sort of the same angle was like Overcast and Disembodied and Dead Guy. And then I'm going to see these bands that are just ripping off At the Gates with like weird emo, like singy parts. I'm like, what the fuck is this? You know, like, and the weird thing is I had my distro and I had like Year of Our Lord CDs and Overcast 7 inches. And I would be like, you guys like this, right? And the kids had no idea. And I was like, this is like 3 years ago this stuff came out, you know?
Yeah, that's the wild thing, is there was like no continuity between those scenes.
It was so weird.
Yeah.
And also at the same time, like, even though Boston was, you know, 3 hours away, you know, all that stuff was filtering up there, and Outbreak was from there and stuff. So like, you know, I'd go drive an hour and a half and see Mental and all that stuff that was exploding. So like, that was really interesting too, because the kids that attended both, you know, and there was still a DIY scene that was like, you know, whatever, like Strong Intention would come up, or Tear It Up would play, you know.
Yeah, Strong Intention being on every show for a particular period of time is like a joke, is like still a joke in DIY.
Yeah, yep, it is. It's like, oh, you guys You guys are showing up last hour to headline. It's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
dude, it's like I will still see jokes of just like, you know, a show in California and it's like, oh hey guys, Strong Intention just hopped on.
Oh boy.
But
um,
yeah, like you mentioning like the locking out stuff and outbreak and shit like that, which is not directly related per se, but you know, we'll throw them both in the general sort of capital H hardcore world. I feel
yeah,
like that was kind of that mixed with it was a weird mix of like kind of what the scene in Fort Wayne in the late aughts evolved into, because the metalcore stuff went away because everybody got wise, you know,
yeah,
and
sure.
then the DIY space, like the Harrison House, like that kind of stuff, the kind of the DIY sensibility and the kind of crusty sensibility kind of carried over into what we were doing, but then it was channeled through the sort of like big H hardcore of locking out, and you know, additionally, you know, we'll say like the ceremonies and outbreaks of the world from that era
Sure.
too, which young kids in my age bracket fucking loved. Like
Amazing
how could you
violence.
not?
Yeah.
Right, sure. Amazing violence. Yeah, there you go. And then additionally, like the youth attack stuff that was like starting to pop, the
Hmm.
end of the kind of like golden era of the No Way, Sorry State scene
Yep.
of that particular decade, and then also like the kind of darker, faster ends of like the Death Wish stuff that was coming out around that time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like we had a strange scene that was like a little bit terror, a little bit mental, a little bit trap them, you know what I mean? And just like kind of all sprinkled in, and like it was somewhere in the middle. It's this kind of weird regional nondescript morass of like hardcore styles, you know?
I mean, I think that could be said for like anywhere that wasn't like a quote unquote like major market, you know,
Yeah.
because I mean, after living in Maine, I moved back to Syracuse and the whole Hellfest thing was so huge and so bloated that
Hmm.
you know, there was this undercurrent of a DIY space that we had, and you would see kind of odd mixed bills, and you had
Yeah.
people like Ryan from Hanging Like a Hex who was really into booking the Louisville stuff and
Hmm.
all those kind of noisy bands, but you'd like Black Sheep Squadron would play with them, and you'd see, you know, like a crust band, local crust band opening for like
Yeah.
Tear It Up. You know, I
Sure.
think that's there's something to be said for vacuums and small scenes and like
Yeah.
doesn't always work. Sometimes it is a little awkward, but like I don't know. Like I lived in Boston for a very long time where there were so many like micro scenes that were huge and had a dedicated um bunch of people, dedicated demographic of like hundreds of kids that didn't go outside of it. And that
Yeah.
was always a little bit of a bummer to me because I kind of liked a little bit of everything myself.
Yeah. We were lucky enough to have kind of quite a few just like satellite cities and brother and sister scenes within like an hour and a half or 2 hours, because Fort Wayne's pretty centrally located in terms of where we are, and like the like I guess we're in the Midwest, but really it's the Great Lakes, you know what I mean, which I
Okay.
think is like kind of a distinct thing, because we're if you drive an hour and a half, like you're on the shore of a Great Lake, maybe 2 hours, you're at the like the lake shore, like, you know, so and three hours away from us is Chicago. A mere 2 hours away from us is like South Bend, which is like a college town. Then
Mhm.
an hour and a half northeast, there's Toledo, which is like right by obviously Detroit. There's Lima, Ohio, which is like a shitty little post-industrial fucking Rust Belt town that's like an hour and a half due east of us. There was a bunch of like mince grindcore there, and there was like a pretty sick house venue there called the Leather Shop. There's this band Pizza High Five out of there, and a bunch of other
Oh yeah.
stuff like 2 and 3 man, just like mince grind, you know.
Mhm.
Um, and then Indy is like an hour 45 southwest of us, and they're a major city, and they had a thriving scene and stuff. So I think the cross pollination, and then additionally all of these little farm towns where, you know, any one of them, even if there's only 30,000 kids there, 30,000 people there, there might be at least a nucleus of kids that put together one or two bands, you know? So I think because of that, there was like a lot of nice regional interconnectivity and cross pollination. So those sort of mixed genre bills were like exactly what you were describing, were exactly the type of things that would happen, where we would have like, so NWI, Northwest Indiana, was like gang shit. It's
Mhm.
like true, like blood in, blood out, and like real gangster ass pit bull, like dangerous guy stuff. We're kind of comfortably in the middle of that world. And then from the East, we have the grind and like really crusty stuff. And then down in Indy, you have like the Midwest Wolfpack crew with like Picked Clean, who was on 6 Feet Under records in
Okay.
the late aughts, and then all of the adjacent bands that kind of sprung out of that scene, like Side Effects, Social Damage, a bunch of very sick bands, Overpower, this really dope power violence band from there. So there was just all this shit where like you might have a show that was like literally like blood in, blood out, like gang dudes opening up a show for like Outbreak and Naysayer, and then also like a melodic hardcore band from 30 minutes outside the city, and then my band that was like a straight edge band that was also playing I Hate God riffs. So it was just like, it's just this like, hey man, whatever, as long as it's good. Like we don't really care, what the kind of subgenre classification of this is. If it's good and we can mosh to it in any way, we're fucking down,
Awesome. That's great. So you've been doing the podcast for a while. Demo Listen Records. It's only cassettes right now, right?
For now, yeah, just
For now.
I mean the obvious limitations of doing vinyl, just the delays on everything, the cost, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's so easy to put out tapes.
It's so easy.
And that started like how long ago did you? What was the first one? Was it Cold Brats?
First one was Cold Brats, yeah.
And that was what, like a year, 2 years ago that got kicked
Yeah,
off?
it was about a year and a half ago.
Okay. So, and that's all going really well. Did you approach it with the idea of like, we're going to just have this Patreon and have these releases for our members of the Patreon and go from that? Like, that's a really cool idea. I don't know. Like, I haven't seen anything other than like maybe like I've seen mixtapes with Patreons and stuff like that, but having an actual label for your Patreon for your patrons is a very, very cool idea. Is there any particular thought process you and Nate went through to just do it, or were you just like, these are just some bands we like, let's just go ahead and do this?
Brother, if we ever stumble into a good idea, it's by pure happenstance. It's I don't know that we have the mental fortitude to like sit down and brainstorm. It's just that one of us during our jobs, which both keep us fairly solitary, happen to just our minds wander into something that we feel is worth verbalizing. We'll throw it at the other dude, and then sometimes that idea happens to be kind of good. So like, yeah, I think the idea was always just like, I think for us it kind of it emerged from not sort of an imposter syndrome per se, but more just like okay, we have this $5 tier where you're getting bonus content, and some people want to give us more because they're nice. And frankly, like we could just take this money and pocket it and be responsible adults and like round out our monthly incomes in a way that would make our lives easier. But we're psychotic and obsessive people who are well into adulthood and love hardcore more than anything in the world. So instead of doing something remotely wise and helping me or him to pad out our future, start a savings account or something, why not do the most ill-advised thing possible and start a label? And I think the idea of just like people giving us more money and us owing them something, because it's like, what are we doing here? We're really, our Patreon episodes are us talking about 7 inches or the Napalm Death family tree or whatever the fuck. It's just like we owe something to these people. So initially we sent out some like dollar bin bangers to our Patreon subscribers, like stuff like just you could find in the dollar bin for $1 to $3, just like classic hardcore records. And then as we had the idea of doing the label, we were like, okay, well, what if anybody who donates at the $10 tier, they just automatically get whatever tape we put out, because that's a reasonably small, like not a huge demographic of people. And if we're using the funds that they're putting forth for us to access anyway, like they're probably owed a tape, and we'll just press up enough that we can then additionally give the band some copies and sell through some stuff and help us to not quite, but at least get close to breaking even on the investment,
And you've kind of hit a wide swath of styles.
Yeah.
The not your very recent newest release, but I believe your last release before that was Feticide, who are a young
Yeah.
death metal band who are fucking great.
Yes.
I know most of my viewers are fans on some level of death metal. It's been my
Hmm.
bread and butter for a long time. If you haven't, check out Feticide. They're really
Yes.
good. Um, I, they have a little bit of that. To me, this is, and I think I'm just echoing your sentiments here, but there is like that kind of stompy maggot stomp sort of style that's hot right now. But there is a technicality. There's a lot of that like not too flashy, technical, cold technical, like where death metal went in the late 90s and the early 2000s, but how it was just, technical enough and still catchy, kind of,
Yeah.
from the early 90s. And like, how these teenagers playing this shit? Because they're really fucking good.
Yeah. Like I want to say 3 or 4 of the members are like 19, like first year college students.
Nice.
And then the vocalist, I think, is 23.
Cool.
But
That's
like, yeah, like the drummer, the guitarist, like all those dudes are like 18, 19 years old. It's crazy.
that's awesome. That yeah. And what is your latest release is what? I'm trying to remember.
Rascal, Heights of
Okay.
Despair. Like blown out, D beat informed hardcore punk stuff. Really, really good shit. If you like Chainsaw, or if you liked that Destruct LP, Echoes of Life LP, or the new Destruct,
Hmm.
or even Warthog, like it's not a 1-to-1 with any of that stuff, but it's very much in the general wheelhouse of this kind of new wave of raw hardcore, we'll call it, where there's a very, very clear D beat undercurrent, but it's still got side to side parts in it.
Right, right. And
It's
I
very
really
much
appreciate I really appreciate that new wave with all the bands you mentioned, Destruct and Warthog, because I like the rawness of D beat, but sometimes just listening to Disclose or something that's
Mhm.
like pure D beat, I can only really rock with it for so long.
Sure.
And you
Yeah, and
need
even
hooks.
like my favorite like D beat and crust stuff that I return to most often does have plenty of just straight up hardcore punk in it, like Disrupt.
Oh, yeah. I think there's something to be said for all that mid-90s American stuff, all that Minneapolis shit, the
Yes.
Profane Existence stuff that came out in the 90s. I go back to
Yeah.
that stuff all the time. Ass Rash,
Hmm.
all that good shit. I love that
Yeah.
stuff. And your bands, are you still doing Code of Violence or have you just moved on
Yeah,
to
not
cross?
really. Like we may eventually, so that whole thing was just a nightmare. I don't even want to get into it. It's not like an
Okay.
interpersonal nightmare. Like I'm psyched with on everybody in the band. It's just one of those things where it was like we actually started that project pre-pandemic, and it was just going to be kind of a fun avenue for me to be like to use like puffy vest and sweatpants riffs. It's just like basically just like do, you know, irate meets suffocation meets dying fetus, that kind of stuff. And it was going to
Right.
be not super serious and just kind of let me stretch my limbs in that world a little bit. And then the pandemic happened, and then we had lineup changes, and then we had like another lineup change, and we were just in failure to launch mode for like 3 full fucking years. And um I just like I got busy with other stuff. I got this job at the record store. Like the podcast is doing well. Then I started Colossal Man, and that picked up steam a lot quicker than I expected it to. And it was just like, yo, guys, like we've tried, we've tried doing this thing, and it's clearly just not clicking. And I have enough other things that are already fully in motion that like I just can't stick it out with this thing right now. Cause I'm in like too many fucking bands. So
That's fair enough. Well, the
yeah.
Colossal Man stuff is great. I mean, I'm
Thanks.
I'm super picky about that stuff too because there was so much of that I was exposed to, just that late '80s new breed comp
Yeah.
style hardcore stuff. I've listened to a lot of it. I lived in Boston for years where that stuff was really popular, and I think the demo's excellent. I'm glad you guys are getting some good exposure and playing some good shows and everything. How about the other like Hill Surf City and Parasitic Twins? Do they still do stuff too?
Yeah, PT was playing a lot more towards the end of like 2022, and we put out a little promo tape. We did like a 3-day run up to Rochester and back to play with
Oh yeah.
Leaking Head.
Yep, I saw that flyer. I was
Yeah, that show's crazy. Super, super good show. So we did like a little 3-day. We did like Rochester, Pittsburgh, and somewhere else. Oh, that's Toledo. And put out a little promo tape that Biff, who plays in Science Man and like has played
yep.
in a zillion other bands, Brown
I
Sugar. He's the
object, Brown Sugar. Yeah.
master. Yes, exactly. He did those tapes for us. Actually, we did it like as a demo listen release, but we kind of didn't because we just thought it would be very self-indulgent to like send our Patreon subscribers like a copy of Nate and I's own band, you know?
Yeah. I get that.
We just kind of wanted to have artifacts for the run, you know?
I was in touch with Biff recently because I also wanted to do some of my own tape duplication for like shorter runs of stuff. And I was like, how do you do it, man? Like, do you have one of those? I've been looking at those things on eBay, like the 4 tape duplicator things. Yeah. And he went to the trouble of being like, no, man, this is what you got to do. And like videoed his whole rig and setup of all these like daisy chained together Onkyo dual cassette decks with like a splitter, and like gave me the whole way to do it. And I was like, my man. Like, I love that dude.
I love Biff, man. He's the fucking dude. So yeah, he did those tapes for us. But so yeah, we were more active, and then our drummer and his wife got preggers, and she just had the kid like 2-3 weeks ago. So like leading up to that pregnancy, we were or like up to the birth, actually, like we were practicing a ton, and we have a new LP basically written that we're going to record just in our drummer's house. That's where we did like the promo tape. And as soon as he's up and like ready to go, we'll probably record the LP, start shopping it out to people. I've talked to a couple labels about maybe doing an LP, but we'll see. And then he'll be going down to part-time at his job, actually, so he'll have a little bit more time to like hit the road and stuff. So we'll probably be doing some weekenders and shit. And then Killsurf City, exact same scenario. Our lead guitarist had a kid like within 2 weeks of Parasitic Twins drummer having a kid. So that is also just kind of like waiting until he can play shows again. And I've been working I've kind of been working on new stuff. But that's Killsurf City is a solo project in the sense that I just write the stuff myself. Up until now, I've recorded everything myself. I might do a full band, like actual studio situation for the next record, whatever it ends up being. But yeah, so but I still write all this stuff by myself. So I've been kind of dicking around with some songs and whatnot. But I would say right now, like Colossal Man is like the main active project, and then Parasitic Twins will probably pick up and start being fairly active in the nearish future.
Cool. Any more stuff being written and recorded for Colossal Man anytime soon, or are you just focusing on playing live?
Yeah, I just left practice before this, and we just like finished up a new song. I think the plan is, so we're basically out of the first run of the demo. We did 150 of those, and between Gwen at Blind Rage selling them online and then the copies that we sold at shows, I think we're down to like no online copies. And then I think I have like 15 or 20 copies that I imagine will probably sell out at like the Enforced show. And then, so Gwen's going to do a second run of those because we have a 3-day run up to Madison, Wisconsin in June planned. And then I'm going to try and book us some other weekenders this summer. So we're probably sell through the second run of the demo, I would imagine fast-ish, within the course of the next few months if they sell at the same rate that they've sold so far. So I am hoping to get like 5-6 songs. I have like the demo I wrote all by myself. The guitarist also plays bass. Josh, my buddy Josh, also plays bass in Parasitic Twins, and we've been playing in bands together for like a decade now. So we bounce off of each other really well, and he understands the references. So he started writing some riffs and songs now too. So I would imagine within the next month, 2 months, we'll probably have an EP done. Probably go record it with the same dude who did the demo, and then As long as it keeps going well and like people's reception continues to be warm and shows keep going off and whatnot, I'll probably shop it out to some like cool guy hardcore labels and see if anybody wants to do a 7-inch or something, and see how it goes.
Cool. Cool. And from what I've gathered reading online, it's sort of tongue in cheek, but also like kind of uncomfortable and confrontational sort of live presence that you're going for. I
Yeah,
read
it's
something
like
about nunchucks.
yeah. I have been. I at a couple shows. I did pass out nunchucks to kids in the audience and told them to use it as a to level the playing field against their ops. So yeah, I have done that. I think it's just. I mean, it's basically just distilling all the things I love best about like classic era pro wrestling heels.
Mm-hmm.
It's that, you know what I mean? It's just like, and it's like, it's both a joke and it's not. Like, it's like the music, I am taking the music seriously in the sense that like, I want it to be good and to rip, but like, fundamentally, it is just a mouthpiece for me to like take the worst parts of myself and amplify them to a cartoonish degree, and say things like, I don't have to be straight edge to be better than everybody in this room, but it sure doesn't fucking hurt, things like that. Just be a lunatic, you know what I mean? Like just to go up there and just be a lunatic. It's like, so it's like it is funny. Incidentally, it is funny, but also it's like me just getting up there and just exercising some demons and like, and I guess like for me, one of the kind of key components of what attracted me to punk and hardcore and just subculture in general is just the idea of provocation,
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and I'm one of those people like, and I think it's helpful on some level for people that are attracted to punk and hardcore that might be a little bit meek or a little bit socially awkward to when you don't have a choice and you have some maniac screaming in your face, it's kind of like a rude awakening that you need sometimes, I feel like.
Totally, yeah. And I think for me, like even musically, I'm pulling a lot, not just from like the new breed kind of era of the New York hardcore stuff, but also heavily from Cleveland. I mean,
Cleveland,
there's a ton of Confront, there's a ton of Die Hard. There's dude, our current live, yeah, exactly. So our current live intro is the first riff from Can't Take No More by Face Value. Like,
dude,
you know what I mean?
I won't fuck with the non-Urba record, but I even like Kick It Over. I think Kick It Over is fun as hell.
I agree. So, but and like Urba, like it is all pro wrestling. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
I rock with all of the Urba stuff. I rock with Nine Shocks. Like I rock with it all. So, like that's very much an inspiration on this too. Is just like go hard, be funny, provoke people, scare half the crowd, and make the other half the crowd laugh. You know what I mean?
And I think that's kind of something that's been. I don't know, man. I haven't. Like since becoming a dad and everything, like I haven't been to a lot of shows, and a lot of the shows that I do go to are metal shows where it's a completely different vibe.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It seems like that might be lost a little bit in hardcore. Like I remember going to see like bands like Cut the Shit, and I'm like, okay, Andrew just choked me and then jumped off of my back. And I had no time to react. Like, what the fuck just happened? And I feel like, I don't know, is that still a thing? Like, is that still happen as much as it used to? Is it still kind of confrontational like that? I don't know.
It is and it isn't. I think the middle ground that I'm trying to tread is like a space between a couple different iterations of violence and provocation that feels a little bit more intuitive to me, because certainly you still have the classic, just like, oh, these are violent gang guys thing that is like always from jump, despite the revisionists, from jump has been present in hardcore. Right?
Yeah, there's some conversation. I think you were talking to Rich Miles on somewhere on Facebook, some Facebook group or something about that. It's true. Like that's been a thing with punk and hardcore since, like it was said, the suicidals and all that kind of stuff.
From jump, dude. Like goons were in this shit from jump, and that's a part of hardcore that components of it are attractive to me. You know what I mean? Like I will not front about that. There are components of that are attractive to me. There are other components that are deeply stupid. So you get confrontation, but in a more sort of overtly non-self-aware machismo posturing kind of iteration of that on one hand. Then on the other, I think you also get the kind of flip side of the thing that I'm trying to do, which is like you have a band like C4 from Boston. That's like the guy who runs like Triple B is in that band, Sam and whatnot. And they're doing a thing that is good musically, but is overtly funny. Like this is a joke band in the same way that Crucial Youth was a joke band, right?
Love that.
The Crucial Youth LP?
No, the C4 LP.
Oh, the C4 LP.
I love the Crucial Youth LP as well.
Yeah, same. But yeah, the C4 LP is fucking awesome. And I love that shit. Like, no, I'm not talking shit about that at all. But so I think I'm trying to be in a space where for some people in the audience, it's like, oh, this is really funny. And for other people, they're like, is this guy fucking joking? And then for everybody, there's actually the chance that you might like get hit in the head with a brick. You know what I mean? Just like, so I kind of want it to be this, I want it to feel more just like less sort of explicitly a joke or explicitly violent and more just like deeply unhinged, I guess.
Right. And I think there's nuance there too between, you know, and I mean, I've been to plenty of like gangy kind of shows where I probably shouldn't have been there, you know, like where I've gotten, you know, punched in the face by, you know, not like beaten up like they wanted to fight me, but just like, you know, crowd kill or whatever by some no neck dude. But I've also bet like Gordon Soley, like the Gordon Soley reunion show at Chaos and Chaos, where it's just like nobody's trying to hurt me specifically.
Right.
This is just mania, you know, like this is just bedlam. And there's that's something that you can't really, you know, if you're not the right sort of personality type, and I've never been that guy either. Like I could never do a band like that because it's just not my style. And I'm not going to pretend to be, but I think it's a certain type of personality that can pull off like that crazy sort of Clevo, specifically Clevo and other places. Like what was that band? No Justice from Baltimore, you know,
exactly.
Kind of
No Justice
where
is
it's like
huge, yeah.
Where it's like it's kind of like chaotic and violent and crazy, but there's like almost no toxic masculinity involved. Like it's just like wild, you know.
Yeah. I mean, so, I did jokingly introduce us as Toxic Masculinity, the band, the other day. But yeah, no, I think No Justice is another obvious like reference point for what I'm trying to do with it, where it's just like, yo, this has the potential to be genuinely dangerous if that's how it goes, but it is a sort of undirected violence. You know what I mean? It's not a like, get these motherfuckers type of shit. It's more just like a, hey, dude, somebody might mosh with a machete. And if that's what happens, I pretend I don't see it. You know what I mean? Like let's just roll the dice tonight and like see what pops off. Additionally, somebody might just mosh with a beach ball and it might be a good time, but like, let's just open the door, open all the windows, all the doors, and just see who comes in. You know what I mean? Let's just have a fucking good time, you know?
And that kind of actually dovetails relatively neatly with the other thing that I have just a bunch of like garbled stream of consciousness free association notes about stuff I wanted to bring up while talking to you. One was the Medallion Kid from the Bug House.
Yeah.
And I mean, you could probably tell this. I'm sure you could tell the story better than me, but the long and short of it, from what I gathered, is just a random wild ass kid who wanted to pay his way in with the medallion. And it felt like something from a video game. But if you want to expound on the details a little bit, feel free.
Yeah. This kid, he showed up and he was strange, but like being where I'm from, there is a sense at any given moment or any given period of our kind of subculture scenes here, there's a sense that it's more a collection of misfits and freaks than it is kind of a honed, focused music scene, right? Like, there are core men, women, and people in the mix, but then there's also just fucking freakazoids, like townie motherfuckers. You know what I mean? Like that everybody knows what the fuck a townie is. Just a townie ass motherfucker. And this kid kind of gave me that vibe. He had come to a couple shows and been very strange and very standoffish, but that in and of itself, not that shocking, not that remarkable. But then at like the second or third show he came to, I was like, hey man, can I get the $10 for the door? And he was like, I don't have $10, but I do have this silver medallion. And he just like, like produces this silver medallion, ostensibly silver medallion. I didn't have my fucking, I didn't have my
your loop?
test strip or my loop, whatever. Like, and I was like, he was like, can I pay you with this? It's worth far more than $10. It's just like, no, you can't pay me with that, dude, because like, what's the provenance on it? You know what I mean? I don't fucking know. Where's the paperwork? And I was like, I can't hand a band a silver medallion and be like, hey, go fence this, like take it to the pawn shop and see what they give you. So like, can you just give me $10? And his friend was like, oh, Jesus Christ. Like, I'll just pay for him. Here's $10, you fucking freak. So he does have some friends, which is encouraging because otherwise I might think like a shooting was imminent, but it seems like he does have kind of a peer group, which is encouraging. A small peer group, but they exist. So he just got stranger and stranger somehow after the medallion thing. Like, first of all, he wears goggles to shows and asked me if there was going to be any bright lights at like the first show he came to. And I was like, no, why? He's like, because I'm epileptic and I might just seize out at any given moment. And I was like, okay.
Thanks for the heads up.
Thanks for the heads up, I guess. Right. So, and he has had a seizure at one of the shows, I should also mention. And then he just got right back the fuck out there after the seizure. So he moshes, but like, again, this is not a core kid. You know what I mean? Like, he's down for the core, but he ain't a core kid. He like crouches down and then jumps straight up like a frog and throws his hands in the air. It's one of the most bizarre physical activities I've ever seen a human being undertake. It's really wild. And he does it consistently. It wasn't a one-off move. It's like his fucking move. So then like, around Christmas time, he came down. Also, he always brings food in his backpack and just goes upstairs into the kitchen. Granted, I don't even live at this house. Like, I haven't lived at this house for a couple years. So like, I'm barely even upstairs. He just goes upstairs and cooks food in the microwave. One time, a whole rack of ribs, and just like came down munching on like pork ribs, dude. It was absolutely psychotic. So around Christmas time, he like comes. He's always the first one there and the last one to leave. He comes through. He has his patented book bag on. His fucking look. He rides his bike to every show too. I should mention, rain or shine. Like he is at every show. So like, yo, he's the most down motherfucker of anyone in the scene other than me. Like, and I'm the dude doing the shows. He's the second most down guy. So he is like, hey man, look what I brought. And he's young too. He's got to be 18, maybe 19. He's like, look what I brought. And he pulls out this huge bell, like brass bell. And I'm like, what's that? And he's like, it's my bell. And I was like, why did you bring it? And he looks at me like very kind of incredulously, like he was like, it's Christmas. And I was like, oh, of course you have to bring the Christmas bell. And then he's like, ding. And it's so fucking loud. And I was like, holy shit, dude, that's really fucking loud. And then his friends, he's like, here, ring it. And his friends are, gong. And I'm like, yo, guys, enough with the bell. I like went full dad. I'm like, enough with the bell. Like, we're not doing the bell anymore. Like, they were trying to hang the bell up, like from the rafters. And I was like, we're not hanging the bell up. We're not hanging the bell up. He was like, I was thinking I could maybe go up to the bands and ask them if they'd like to hit the bell. And I was like, don't ask the bands if they want to hit the bell, please. I don't want the bell at all and anywhere in sight. Like, I'm done with the bell. It's fucking deafeningly loud. Additionally, not that show, but either one, like just prior to or just after that show, a winter show where he must have caught a ride. And it was like the one show he didn't ride his bike to. He was just standing there as I was breaking down, and it was just like me and him. I was like shutting off the lights, like turning the power off. And he was like, hey, you want to give me a ride? And I was like, I guess, it's snowing. So I'm like, I'm not going to say no. So I'm like, I guess, dude, where do you live? And he like told me, and it was on my way anyway. So I was like, yeah, all right, man, fucking get in the whip. Let's hit it. So like in the car, and he's like telling me he listens. This is why I haven't talked about him on the show, by the way. He listens to the fucking show, which seems remarkable because it doesn't seem like he's absorbed anything from the show. Like you would think it would like imbue him with some sense of like the culture that he's now participating in, but it hasn't translated literally at all.
Yeah.
So
total Martian. Yep.
Yeah, just a true fucking loon. So he's just he's like in the car. He's like, I was listening to the show, and you mentioned, Christian metalcore on the show, and I heard the best song I've ever heard the other day. I was like, oh, what's that? And he was like, it's a cover of the VeggieTales theme song by a Christian metal band. Do you want to hear it? And I was like, that's not really my shit, man. But yeah, if you want to play it for me, he plays it for me. It's the worst thing I've ever heard in my life, expectedly, right?
No way.
And he's like, are you aware of any other like Christian like death metal or anything that you could put me onto? And I was like, well, it's kind of an oxymoron, but there is this heavier Christian metalcore band from the late 90s with kind of death metal tendencies called Embodiment. They have this record, Embrace the Eternal, that I think is genuinely quite good. And I was like, do you want me to write it down for you? And he goes, oh no, there's no need for that. I'm recording our conversation. And I was like, what?
Oh yeah, that's right. I read about this.
I was like, what do you mean? I was just like, I didn't freak out because I'm like, this kid might kill me. I was just like, right on, man. That's cool. That's totally chill, dude. Like, he's just like surreptitiously recording us the whole time. Just a wild kid, dude. And like every show, he's like, even the shows where he doesn't do anything like truly unhinged, he's at least frog leaping. And most of the touring bands now that are aware of the show or whatever, which is kind of an increasingly, large swath of the bands that I bring through, kind of get brought into the Demo Listen extended family. Yeah. A lot of them ask about Medallion Kid now, or like, hey, point out Medallion Kid.
Wow. I mean, it's cool though, because I mean, I can see him in a bigger hardcore scene, like getting fucked with and like not coming back, Yeah. I mean, from my experiences as a kid, like honestly, my scene growing up was a lot more open-minded than people give it credit for. But even so, like my first show, like a hardline guy tried to start a fucking fight with me just because I had a mullet and a Napalm Death shirt on,
Sure.
And I wasn't phased. I came back, but I think that's the experience for a lot of people. And like, I don't know, it's cool. That's cool that he has people like watching out for him.
Sure.
But and also like kind of the whole point of punk and hardcore, I think, is like being a legit weirdo, an outsider on some level.
Yes, I agree. And I think that takes many different permutations. I don't think that has to look just one way or the other. What I was talking about with Rich, you know what I mean? I think he kind of has a specific idea of like his platonic ideal for like what that looks like. And I think everybody in punk and hardcore kind of has their platonic ideal. Like for some people, it's just the goons. I just want the goon shit. I only want the cold as life shit, and some people just want the fucking asymmetrical sunglasses, and I'm of the mind that like, I will take nearly any iteration of Strange as long as it's dyed in the wool, real deal weirdo shit,
Yeah.
And that can go all the way to like degenerate gambler, pit bull guy with a gun to this asymmetrical sunglasses guy. I just want it to be like, I want you to really be an outsider. Like that's all I really want,
Yeah. And I saw a lot of criticism levied. I want to say starting out in like maybe the 2010s, where I mean, I'm not like an OG tough guy, but I am older at this point. I'm 45, and I'd go to shows and I'd see like, kind of harder dudes kind of, just bitching about how kids today don't know like the actual struggle of like being threatened with violence for dressing a certain way.
Sure.
And it's like, well, yeah, but that's just the way things are now. Like everybody's used to people who look weird. That's just the way it is. It doesn't mean that people don't experience like some level of alienation or, feeling ostracized. It's on a different level. I mean, it's probably like on a familial level. Nowadays, it's probably this weird sense of isolation created by our technology that
very much so.
It's probably making everybody fucking weird, to be honest.
Yeah.
But it's a different story. But and it's true. Like, I mean, I grew up in a small town in upstate New York, and I also was a spiky haired street punk type of kid for a long time. And I got chased. I got fucking shot at once. Like, like things were different. But I think, people in the 80s had it harder than I did. So whatever. But to round back to your point, I do agree that there are probably some people where it is legitimately just a fashion and maybe just a
Sure.
phase. You know, I think you were talking about like art school types, and I definitely
Yeah.
saw a lot of like fair weather people when I was in Boston because it's a massive college town, you know, and it
Yes.
attracts so many different people. So there are a lot of people that just kind of came and went.
Well, I mean, usually the people putting the money in the gas tank of a touring band are the fair weather people. That's going to be the vast majority of your audience in attendance at any given show during any
Sure.
given period of time. Like most people are going to move into and through this stuff in like a 3 to 5 year period that usually aligns with their college career or somewhere in that general age range. And that's all well and good. Like that's kind of
Mhm.
always been the nature of this thing. It is only the true deviants and the sick-minded loons such as ourselves that just like are like, oh, this is my whole life now. Like this
Yeah.
is it. This is what I do forever, you know?
In Boston for a while, there was you know how like different when there's like a social group of people or like a bunch of cool people, there'll be in jokes and stuff like that and little
Mhm.
slogans that everybody will say, usually centered around like a silly incident. And I wasn't there for the inciting incident. It was at a place that isn't was only around for I don't know. It was a record store that did shows regeneration that was only around for a year or two. But I don't know what the story was. It had something to do with like some rando supposedly grabbing a girl, grabbing her butt or something during some pop punk band, and another girl punched him in the face and yelled "Norms out," and it became this rallying cry for Boston punks. But it also turned into this whole thing where like I don't think it was ever 100% serious, but there were little factions of people that kind of butted heads over this and that. And it was often the really, really punk types that would be like, "Oh, he's a fucking norm." And I was like, "You know what? Like, I get it. Like, I'm not taking any of this seriously, like, haha, whatever. But wouldn't sometimes I really just wish I was just fucking normal. Like, because I got into punk because
Yeah.
I'm a legitimately or I was at least. I think I've done a lot of work away from it, but like legitimately fucking broken person. Like
Oh,
I
no
was like,
doubt,
I
dude.
don't know if being normal is like really that much of an insult, really. You know, like
Yeah.
I kind of wish I was just a fucking norm.
True. Yeah, I sit in envy of normalcy all the time. Like it just, I mean, not really, because like I don't know, I like my life, and I've strangely, especially in the last few years, have managed to like flip this kind of lifelong obsession into something that's helping keep me afloat, so, you know,
Yeah,
financially too, which is not a thing that I ever really thought that I could do. So, you know, I'm still living far below the the income level of someone a 33-year-old man should be at, but like yo, I'm not in the streets. So, you know what I mean?
yeah.
So I'm hanging in, right? So,
Well, and then
but
I
yeah,
mean, it's guys like you that also like, especially you know, in smaller scenes that put in all this fucking hard work and keep everything functioning, you know, and I mean, hats off. I again, like I've done my own bands here and there and booked some shows and done little things, but I mean, the level of work that you put into it, I mean, it must be purely out of love for it, you know, and
yeah.
that's awesome. Not to
I think
blow smoke up your ass too much, but you know,
no, I appreciate it. I was gonna say like just to disarm that praise a little bit, like I think it supersedes and goes beyond love. It's just like it's just this single-minded obsession. I mean, as cliche as it is, it's just like it just encompasses everything that I am. It colors how I view all of my social interactions, the world around me. It's just like not only do I not know how to do anything else really, I just don't even want to. You know, it's just
yeah,
I found this thing that moved me on such a deep and profound level at such a young age, like that the search was over for me very quickly. And that's not to say that I'm not still a searcher in some capacity. I read books, you know, I'm into nerd stuff. I have a lot of different interests,
yeah,
100%. But
sure,
fundamentally, everything is secondary to this thing. And like as much as it's for the love of it and like I want to perpetuate it and pass this down to other people and create spaces where other folks can hopefully have the same type of transformative experience that I had with it. It's also just like, yo, I want to be able to see good shows 10 minutes from where I live. And if I got to be the motherfucker to put it on, I will do it. I'll build the scene so that I can drive 10 minutes and watch Restraining Order instead of watching restraining order 3 hours away and having to eat up my Tuesday night. Yo, man, if I can just book them in town and I can get 150 kids to turn out, like, let's fucking do it, because this is what I like to do. This is how I like to spend my time, is fucking front flipping onto people to sick ass bands. So like, let's get it popping so I can have a good time in my hometown.
Right on. And the nerd stuff. Let's just talk about the nerd stuff for a second.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I've been a D&D head, D&D player, whatever, since first edition.
Sure.
I got into it in fourth grade. I never could find anybody to play with. Played it like on and off here and there in high school. And then it actually solidified with people from the hardcore scene. Before I moved from Syracuse, I played with Chuck from Black SS and a bunch of people that weren't involved with hardcore. And then a few years later, when I was living in Salem, it was like I was playing with John Peters, who was in he was the vocalist for One King Down for One Record, and he was also in Sparklights the Friction. He was the DM for a while, and then a mutual friend of ours took over. This guy Chris, who was in that black metal band Malleus, played with us. So we had this, and my friend Paris, who's like a vocalist in a doom metal band. So it was all these like Subculture people playing D&D. Did you? I listened to that first 7-inch Club episode with you on it, and did you say you got into it a little bit later, or you just started playing a little bit later, or what was the story with that?
Yeah, so I started playing a little bit later, but I grew up playing like the 90s, like Infinity Engine CRPGs. So I got into like the Forgotten Realms setting and D&D and Magic the Gathering and all that stuff in the late 90s, fairly young. And then same as you, I think I was really interested in D&D and the concept of tabletop RPGs. And like, I distinctly remember I was enrolled in college, but I didn't actually go. And I spent all of my loan money to like pay the rent at my first apartment. And then I ended up being in student loan debt for like college, because I got grants too, because I was poor. So I got like Pell grants and stuff. But then I didn't even finish my first semester of college, and I spent it all on living expenses. And they were like, you have to pay those back because you didn't use them. Like, you didn't finish school. And I was like, oh, oops. Like I had, as many of us did, like I had a somewhat tumultuous home life situation. So like, I love my parents, but I didn't exactly have somebody who was saying, okay, now do this. And like, this is how this works. Cause they were like, I also have pretty young parents. My dad was 19 when he got my mom pregnant. You know what I mean? So my dad is only 20 years older than me. So like, I got to think like, I think about where I'm at, my sort of mental state, etc., and just think like, fuck, dude, like when I was 18, my dad is only a few years older than I am now,
Isn't that a trip? Because like I became a parent at 37, and to me that's like a little older, but I live in the South. I talked to my boss, and she's like, I'm like grandma age. We have kids the same age. I was like, Kylie, you're like younger than me by like a year. And also my mom had me when she was 23. And when I was 23, like I had no idea what the fuck I was doing.
No, dude. Like, no, I mean, literally, like, well, I think this applies to my dad too, until he got my mom pregnant and he was like, oh shit, I gotta be normal now. But like, I was 19, I was just like fighting people. So I was like, you know what I mean? I was just like throwing trash cans at people. So it's just like, I can't even imagine being a parent, but like, yeah. So like, so I got these Pell grants and shit. And I just like, I don't know. I just got, I didn't have like anything much going on in my life. And I remember going, one of the few times I went to the school, my buddy Jared and I went and I printed out like the AD&D player's handbook and the monster manual, like using my free library. I had unlimited printing, which they presumed would mean like you would use it to print off papers and shit. But I printed off like hundreds of pages of D&D stuff that I like punched out and stuck in a binder. And that was like my first like real foray into like trying to play actual tabletop RPGs and not just CRPGs and shit. And it didn't get too far. And then Nate and I probably, I want to say 7 years ago now, we got like a consistent group together. And until the beginning of this year, we had the same weekly group going for like 6 or 7 years basically. And then I played Magic a little bit as like a kid, like in the late 90s, early 2000s and stuff. And like, not just Magic, like I fucked with like general like TCGs and stuff. Like, you know, I fucked with like the Star Trek TCG a little bit. And like, I still kind of collect those. Like I bought a bunch of like still in the shrink, like dead stock Highlander TCG starter packs the other day. And like, yeah, so I've been into nerd stuff my whole life. And it's not the same. It doesn't play the same role as hardcore and subculture do, but it is as fundamental, kind of unalterable a part of me as that stuff is, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I had that so much as a kid, where it's so funny because I'll pick up a rule book now and I'll start reading it. I'm like, I don't want to read this. But when I was in grade school and junior high, even when I had nobody to play with, I would memorize, and we're talking first edition, where like the rules are real convoluted and weird,
Yeah.
like figuring out what THACO is and all that shit.
THACO, dude. Fucking THACO. Are you fucking kidding? The least intuitive fucking AC system ever conceived.
Yeah, to the point where like I even had a band because it was late 90s and everybody was, you know, the youth crew revival stuff was kicking off, and I had sort of it was pretty much a joke band called Gygax. There's a power metal band now called Gygax.
Yeah.
Where it was like a hard D&D hardcore band. And like and that actually one of the guys from Black SS was in that, but like
Nice.
I was always obsessed with it on some level. I have a bunch of like tattoos from the 1981 Fiend Folio.
Sick.
You know, and I love that stuff. But at the same token, I think like, you know, everybody's different, but and I recognize that on some level it's kind of cringe, but my wife is into that stuff too, big time. Like she has like reproductions of Drizzt swords. They're not mine, they're hers.
That's sick.
She's like, I gotta hang those up. I'm like, yeah, you do. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, you do.
But she played with us for a while too, played D&D with us. But we are those people that have like D20, you know, like Chinaware and stuff. We definitely took our son to see the movie and really enjoyed it. I understand the criticisms you and Nate have levied. I get it. You know, believe me, I'd love to see a brutal, like Conan style version of a D&D movie. But if I'm going to see something that's like just trying to be Guardians of the Galaxy, but in the Forgotten Realms setting, I can enjoy it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, when I wrote like a review of it for Letterboxd, and I think I said as much on the show too, is just like my final parting thought on the review after levying those criticisms at it were like, if you, unlike me, are not 2 weeks out from a manifesto, you will like this just fine. You know, if you're not in your Kaczynski arc, this is fine, you know, but like but if you're like me, a lunatic, it will be emblematic of the world you wish to firebomb. So, you know, if
it weren't for the lumber shortage, I would have started building my shed. I'm going to get to it as soon as I get the materials. Yeah, I do get the mindset, but yeah, I after, and also there was the whole thing. I don't know if you cared when it came out, but I did go and see the one that came out in like 2000 or whenever it was with Jeremy Irons. And like, that was really the worst shit I've ever seen.
Yeah. Nightmare.
It's really not good, but yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think I covered almost. Oh yeah. One quick note about your dad, since we were talking about him earlier. Was he involved in like stuff going on in indie, like back in the day? Did he like go see the Zero Boys, or was that a little bit before his time? Or
that was, I mean, they were still playing, but like they were already past their prime, you know. My dad is exactly 20 years older than me. So like he would have been a teenager in the early to mid to late 80s. So it's kind of unfortunate because I feel like there wasn't, especially again, like he's not living in New York or anything. He's living in Fort Wayne in 1989. Right. So when he gets my mom pregnant, which was very much an accident, I think for him, it's just like, oh, okay, well, now I go and get a job at the steel mill with my pops, and I become a normal guy because I'm having a kid now, and like that's what I do. And
Yep,
it's a bummer because I feel like he probably would have connected with a lot of the hardcore stuff that was about to happen in the 90s, because he was 19 in 1989. Like he could have got the first Insight 7-inch, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He could have been down with the early Dark Empire releases, you know, like
I've been moshing at hardball shows or whatever.
Right. Yes, exactly. So he was right in the wheelhouse for it. And he did connect with like the stuff that kind of trickled up to the surface. Like he had, somehow, like later on, I discovered in his CD collection, like he had like songs to fan the flames of discontent. Most of his stuff cut off at the 80s, but then he had a record collection in the 80s too, obviously, that I've inherited. And he had like the first Moss Icon 7-inch. So he had this stuff that was like transitioning from the 80s into the 90s, and then in the 90s he was marginally aware of like alt stuff. Like he loved like the Afghan Wigs and stuff, and then some heavier shit like that Refuse stuff that kind of found its way to more mainstream spaces. So he was involved, but he mostly was just like as a participant. But he and my godfather, Doug, did help book shows at this club in town called the Seventh Level. And they brought through like Naked Raygun, the Pixies on like their first US tour, I think. I know they booked Dead Milkman here. My godfather played in kind of like a death rocky band called Primitive Baptist Church, and there were hardcore and punk bands around here that like my pops would go see and book on these shows and stuff. But I think his involvement and kind of the logistics of like maintaining a scene was certainly existed, but was fairly marginal, you know.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I tried to think of it like while I was brainstorming about this discussion, interview, whatever you want to call it. I was like, damn, what? I'm trying to remember. I'm like, what was from Indiana? I was like, definitely the Zero Boys and Sloppy Seconds.
Yeah, Sloppy Seconds. I have the first Sloppy Seconds 7-inch, which was also in my pop's collection.
Yeah, they're like the only band of that style that I really listen to. And one of my favorite punk bands of all time, actually.
Yeah.
Got the L testicles tattoo right there.
Oh, sick.
But yeah, I was kind of curious about that because I mean, my parents actually, I mean, my stepdad was a Deadhead, but he actually, you know, had some Clash and Pretenders and stuff like that.
My dad was a Deadhead too.
Oh, really? Oh, right on.
Yeah, he got really into acid. So
he was really into what?
Acid.
Ah, yes. Yeah. My parents were too.
Yeah, he was like, so weirdly, just like a quick aside about like a weird like Grateful Dead hardcore crossover that centers around my father. So he went to this fest in, I want to say like 87 down in Bloomington, Indiana, called Rock for No Reason. And I want to say like a very early iteration of Screeching Weasel played, a bunch of bands played, hardcore, pop punk, kind of the whole gamut. But the Hated from Annapolis played, that like emo core band from Annapolis.
Okay.
And they played and he really liked it, and he bought their first 7-inch or one of their early 7-inches, the No More We Cry 7-inch. Now it's like kind of a sought after artifact of like the early kind of post-revolution summer emo core stuff. So the following summer is like following the Dead on some shows, and he's down in Baltimore, and he's like in the parking lot pre-gaming or whatever, hanging out before that show, probably taking a bunch of acid, and he sees like other hardcore guys. Because my dad was like, again, into everything, but like you see old pictures of him and he's rocking like Agnostic Front shirts and stuff. Like he's a hardcore guy, you know. He sees like other hardcore guys and goes up to him and starts shooting the shit. And he's like, yo, I actually saw a band like a few months ago from out this way called The Hated. And the dudes were like, oh, that's like, those are our homies. Those are our like brother band. Like we play shows with them all the time. We're in a band too. And my dad was like, oh, what band are you in? And they're like, oh, it's this like kind of hardcore band called Moss Icon. And he was like, oh, that's fucking sick, dude. And so they ended up like shooting the shit, hanging out all weekend at this Dead show. And they were like, here, man, check, we got copies of like our first 7-inch here with us. Like we just put it out recently, like check it out, bring it back home, you know, tape it, show your friends or whatever. And so as a teenager, when I was getting really into the Rev Summer and like emo core stuff and just downloading everything I could from the internet that was even adjacent to it, I was listening to Moss Icon. And he was like, dude, is this Moss Icon? And I was like, yeah. And he just didn't have, because this was like early days of the internet, no real social media. He didn't, his only tether to contemporary punk and hardcore at that point was me. And so he didn't have any conception of the fact that Moss Icon had, in the intervening decades, become like a legendary band in that early emo core scene, you know? So he was like, how do you know about this band? And I was just like, what do you mean? They're a legendary band. Like they're one of the connecting points between like Rev Summer emo and like 90s hardcore. What do you mean? And he was like, I met these guys. I have their first 7-inch. I was like, what the fuck? And it's since found its way to my collection. But yeah.
That's rad. Yeah. I don't have anything like that. I think it was like a friend of mine in high school. It was weird because his mom was like an older hippie lady. And I guess it sort of tracks, especially because I think they were from Buffalo. But like she's like, yeah, I'm friends with the Meat Puppets. I'm like,
oh, nice.
That's weird. Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
But yeah, I mean, but my stepdad was almost purely a Deadhead, and my mom just kind of followed along suit with it. And
yeah,
I remember being on all these blankets like during festivals and stuff when I was really little, and I was like, because I've come to appreciate like some of their music later on. Of course, I hated it when I was younger, but I was like, did I see the Dead a bunch of times when I was like 4? I have no idea. Like, because again, like where I come from, and I don't know if it's a similar thing, you know, in your part of the world, but especially in central New York, like the whole like jam band stoner type of thing is way more emblematic of like jocks and bullies. Like every dickhead like kegger dude is really into lacrosse and like Fish and the Grateful Dead. It's not a counterculture thing at all. I think that's probably kind of common like in a lot of places, but I never really thought of that band that way until I realized, at least in the 60s and stuff, they were pretty, you know, pretty on the edge of society, and a lot of their fans were too. But by the time like you know, the 80s and 90s, it just seemed like an excuse to do drugs or whatever. But and it is interesting to think, because I'm sure like there were plenty of like punks that followed them around for one reason or another, just for the tribal aspect. But yeah, it's interesting to kind of revisit them with different eyes now that I'm not an angry teenager anymore.
For sure. Yeah. I think a couple of years ago, I finally was like, so I was getting really into like new writers of the Purple Sage and stuff. And I was like, well, the Dead were in the same scene as this band, and like, you know, like the joy of cooking and that kind of stuff. Like maybe I could fuck with the Dead. And like, I listened to the first couple records and I was like, oh no, this is good. Like once they get really jammy and out there, it really loses me. Like I still have no affinity for jam bands in pretty much any iteration. But like the early, like country tinged kind of Americana stuff, I think is fantastic.
Yeah, I like that too, for sure. And also, like, I was a big nut for the like when we discovered the Freaks and Geeks box set when it got re-released. There was the whole Grateful Dead angle in that, and I was like, that kind of softened me to it for one reason or another. But
yeah,
hate to end it on a hippie note, but that's pretty much all my notes. So,
hey man, if we gotta end it on a hippie note, that's just how it is, man. I like a free form conversation. You never know where it's gonna begin or end.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Kind of like a jam band.
Exactly. We're freestyling here. All right. Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm gonna call it. We can talk for a minute after I cut the live feed here. Did you have any parting thoughts or anything like that?
You know, I don't know. I'm always bad at plugging stuff that I do. I guess I'll just remind everybody, if you found listening to me talk to be not wholly intolerable, I do it every week on Demo Listen. You can find it everywhere podcasts are heard. I know we didn't really discuss the format like in that much detail, but we literally just we riff about life, and most of the time is spent listening to new music that falls broadly under the subculture umbrella. So a lot of hardcore, a lot of punk, a lot of death metal, a lot of post-punk, some indie rock, some shoegaze. Pretty much anything that brushes elbows with punk or subculture, we'll have it on the show. So if that sounds appealing to you, tune in. You can find it, like I said, Spotify, iTunes, et cetera, et cetera. if you do like new breed comp style New York hardcore, if you like 90s Clevo core stuff, if you like the Outburst demo, if you like the Breakdown demo, if you like Killing Time, I play in this band Colossal Man. I've only played a handful of shows. We put out a demo a couple months ago. People seem to like it a lot. I'm very thankful for that because it gives me an excuse to get up on stage and wave a sword around at people and be unhinged. So if you like New York hardcore with a lot of bounce in it, but still plenty of like skinhead kind of old school type of shit. Yeah, listen to Colossal Man. I think the demo's pretty good. I think you might like it. That's it. I'll just do my little plugs.
And I back that statement. I like Colossal Man quite a bit.
Sick. Thank you, man. And thank you for having me on. There's almost nothing I love more than simply shooting the shit about things that I like. So
Right on. Well, I'm glad I could have you. And now I got to figure out who I'm going to have next week. This is going to be a tough one to follow up. But
I don't know.
we'll
I
see.
think I set the bar pretty low, man.
No. All right. Thanks everybody for watching. I'll talk to you folks soon. Don't be strangers. Who knows? Maybe I'll do a proper update at some point that isn't a live stream, but probably not anytime soon. All right. Bye. And broad.